America's UFO history is marked by several mysterious waves of sightings and encounters. Described as airships in the 1800s, the unexplained craft were reportedly viewed by thousands, with 2 witnesses even coming face to face with their crew in possibly the earliest record of attempted alien abduction. Here we look at California's airship wave during 1896. Already by this time, the world's technology was advancing, with the era of the Old West coming to an end. Railroads were extending, and machines commonly used in business and industry, including by then automobiles called horseless carriages. Telephone systems and the first X-ray machine came into use, while regarding air travel, hot air balloons were used then. Experiments had begun on installing petroleum engines in balloons, but engine-driven balloons did not become a thing until after 1900. Predating the 1903 development of airplanes, in November 1896, people throughout California and Washington state started observing strange objects travelling in the sky. As most people had heard of airships that some inventors were working on in Europe, the flying craft they saw in the sky were named airships, and according to the reported sightings, many of these objects were definitely not balloons. Not at all blimp-like, many were metallic-looking and some flat, with some travelling way too fast to be balloons, while making some very strange manoeuvres. Also, in several cases, strange humanoid beings could be seen in or around these ships. The first documented sightings of what we now call unidentified flying objects were reported over several nights in November 1896 in Sacramento, California. Observers witnessed a strange glowing light in the sky that seemed to be attached to the bottom of some kind of flying ship. Although they were unable to make out details about the object itself, the glowing lights they found quite terrifying. Newspaper headlines described mystic flying lights and phantom airships. Although mainly observed in northern California, the phenomenon was occasionally seen as far south as Los Angeles. On November 22, 1896, an edition of the San Francisco Call quoted witnesses stating that the UFO appeared to descend gradually and smoothly as if under perfect control. One witness claimed that there was no doubt in their mind that it was an airship, quote, supplied with electric lights and well manned. A significant feature of the descriptions was the bright light seen at the bottom of the ship. It was directed toward the earth below as the craft coasted overhead. One witness stated the machine was brilliantly lit and the lower light shed a wide arc on the ground as it passed over above, while the headlight could be observed to cover a great distance ahead of the machine. In many later sightings, namely those in the 1950s and 1960s, UFOs were often seen shining a bright light down to the earth below as they travelled overhead. In some incidents, light beams from a UFO were seen to light up the entire landscape underneath for miles ahead of the ship. Many reliable witnesses reported viewing the UFO on November 22nd, among them Sacramento's deputy sheriff and district attorney. 2 Methodist ministers, Reverends H. Copeland and John Kirby, observed what they described as a red fireball with white lights on the front and back near Knight's Ferry, California. They watched as the UFO rose upwards into the air, then descended and skimmed along the ground, finally disappearing from sight. Witnesses described the light as burning twice as bright as a typical arc light. Later that same evening, the light was seen over San Francisco and many other cities where it was reportedly viewed by hundreds of witnesses, including the domestic staff of San Francisco Mayor Adolph Sutro. However, the most astonishing of the 1896 airship sightings took place on November 25th near Lodi, California. Colonel H.G. Shaw and Mr. Camille Spooner were travelling in a horse-drawn carriage through the countryside in that area when they saw 3 very tall beings standing next to the road. Visible in the distance behind them was a huge cigar-shaped UFO hovering quietly over a body of water. Shaw later described it as having a smooth metallic surface which was quite featureless, apart from having a rudder and pointed ends and with no visible machinery. He estimated the vessel to have a diameter of about 20 feet and said that it was around 150 feet in total length. In an interview published by the Stockton Evening Mail, Colonel Shaw said, "Looking up, we beheld 3 strange beings. They resembled humans in many ways, but still they were not like anything I had ever seen. They were possessed of a strange and indescribable beauty." Shaw stated that they wore no clothes, but their bodies were covered by soft, fine fuzz. He related that the beings were 7 feet in height and very slender, and he also noticed that their hands were quite small and delicate, and that their fingers were without fingernails. He said that their feet, however, were nearly twice as long as those of an ordinary person, although they were very narrow, and the toes were also long and slender. He observed that they were able to use their feet and toes in much the same way as a monkey, and in fact they seemed to have much better use of their feet than their hands. As for other features, Shaw gave a detailed description, saying that their faces and heads were without hair and their ears were very small. He stated that the nose had the appearance of polished ivory, while their eyes were large and lustrous. The mouth, however, was small, and it seemed to him that they were without teeth. Shaw also said that they were extremely light, stating, "As one of them approached me, I reached out to touch him and, placing my hand under his elbow, pressed gently upward. Lo and behold, I lifted him from the ground with scarcely an effort. I would estimate that the specific gravity of the creature was less than an ounce." Shaw also attempted to communicate with the beings, asking them where they were from. They seemed not to understand him, but began to emit what he described as a strange warbling noise. Their speech was addressed to each other and sounded like a monotonous chant, which was guttural in tone. Shaw observed that these extraterrestrials used several strange tools, including what appeared to be a machine to help them breathe. He said that each of them had slung under its left arm a bag to which was attached a nozzle, and that every now and then one of them would place the nozzle over their mouth, at which time he would hear a sound of escaping gas. The beings also carried another implement like a kind of lamp, an object about the size of a hen's egg, wherein, when held up in their partly opened hand, some substances emitted a remarkably intense and penetrating light, which was almost unimaginable. He said that, despite its intensity, it had no unpleasant effect upon the 2 men's eyes, and they found they could gaze directly at it. It seemed to him like some sort of luminous mineral, although they obviously had complete control of its effects. The strange beings examined Shaw's buggy and then, in one of the earliest reports of attempted alien abduction, tried to physically force him to accompany them back to the airship. Shaw related, "One of them, at a signal from another who appeared to be the leader, attempted to lift me, probably with the intention of carrying me away. Although I made not the slightest resistance, he could not move me, and finally the 3 of them tried it together without the slightest success. They appeared to have no muscular power outside of being able to simply move their own limbs." Following the failed abduction attempt, the beings moved back toward a nearby canal where, resting in the air about 20 feet above the water, was their immense airship. The creatures seemed to glide as they moved away, sometimes not even touching the ground. Shaw described them as walking rapidly toward the ship, not as a human would walk, but with a swaying motion, their feet only touching the ground at intervals of about 15 feet. He and Spooner followed them as speedily as possible and reached the bridge just as they were about to embark. With a small leap, the ETs rose up to the machine, opened a door on the exterior, and disappeared inside. The two humans watched as the ship then shot through the air very rapidly, visibly expanded and contracted with a kind of muscular motion, and was soon out of sight. Shaw's is possibly the first published account of apparently extraterrestrial beings attempting to abduct a human by forcing them into their spacecraft. Airship sightings all across California continued through December 1896. Then, suddenly as the year came to a close, no more were reported.